And hello again. Here we are back with another podcast about the simulation. This is part 4. For those of you who haven't heard the first 3 parts, feel free to do that before you tune into this one. There might not be a whole lot that makes sense if you hear this one first. But straight off the bat, and just to recap, we've talked about a few things in the last 3 parts. We've looked at time, and we've looked at the systems that are creating the simulation that we sensorially experience and are subject to by artificial systems, how they came to exist, and how they are responsible for our perception of our universe, and how it came to be that they could have been active for the entirety of our known history on this presumed planet. So I've mentioned a few times that there's an underlying matrix that holds this simulation together, that there is underlying coding, and I will get onto that. It's very detailed and intricate, and I want to be able to take the proper time to look at the different aspects of that coding. But straight off the bat, I wanted to raise the issue of the military system which is in place, and one of the major aspects of that, which is GPS, the Global Positioning System, geographic locationing, as one way of putting it. And we know that, we have been told that our planet spins on an axis, and that the outermost points of that axis on the surface of the Earth is where what we mark to be 0. 0 at north and 0 at south. Now, what we are carrying around with us when we carry a smartphone is a GPS in the phones. And there are also satellite systems and radar that are operating according to GPS all the time. Previous podcasts, we looked at the saturation of our airwaves and all the information that is passing through those frequencies that we cannot see all the time, imperceptible to us, but profoundly impactful upon us. So GPS, Global Positioning Systems, geographic coordinates, with 0 and 0, north and south, where our planet allegedly spins on its axis. It may or it may not. We would honestly have to ask somebody who's witnessed that for themselves. Nonetheless, even if it does, the question that I have posed through these files, or something strange that I have noticed and documented through these files, is that we also have a magnetic north and a magnetic south pole, which are the opposite to our geographic poles. So where there is a north pole, it's actually the south magnetic pole, and where there is a south geographic pole, it's actually a north magnetic pole. And on average, the difference between these two poles is around 11.5 degrees. The magnetic pole is at the moment fluctuating. It's floating and moving. And straight off the bat, what sort of struck me as odd is how if our universe is sort of, easily measured by physics and we can safely call it a system of energy, which is pretty much everything. When we zoom out, we're looking at a system of the interplay of energy and how we are perceiving it. Then why would a planet axis around geographic coordinates instead of magnetic? And there's a clear difference. And this is where it sort of becomes a bit chicken and the egg. Because what we could say is, well, man you didn't really measure geographic coordinates until he discovered that there was a geographic pole. And so he called it 0. And he discovered this because the axis of the Earth was turning. The Earth was turning around this axis where 0 at the geographic poles was the endpoints of this, invisible bar that's run through the planet that we call an axis. And there he had it. I mean, that's just simple. We notice something and we mark it and then we measure it and we call it that. But I'm not really sure how that actually happened. To notice that a system is moving around an axis that is not its natural energetic axis. It's not its natural magnetic axis. And the question occurred to me, well, how did that happen? How was it determined that our the planet that we've been told exists, for a start, came to axis around what is essentially a man-made measurement system, and vice versa? Chicken or the egg, which came first? Man measuring the geographic poles and marking them and calling them this and that, or the axis itself. Now, when we have a body of energy, a collective body of energy that we are generating, and it appears to us as a planetary system, and further we determine that we are located through consensus within a simulation on another ball of energy where there are clear anomalies in terms of the magnetics and the magnetic field that we also experience as a collective on this presumed planet. What we've tended to do is just accept the information that we've been given. Well, the magnetic poles are here, they're opposite to this, and the geographic pole's there, and that's because that's what the Earth spins around. Okay. But we're not quite, we haven't really looked at why that's the case and what that means and what is that really about. So that's why I ask the question. How a planet, a collective consensus is orbiting around an axis that has then sort of been outwardly measured through increments by man. So, look, maybe even before we try and answer the chicken or the egg question, which came first, we can look at the GPS system itself. It's all numbers. It's obviously got nothing to do with the magnetic field of our planet, and therefore utterly nothing to do with our physical electromagnetic field either, as individuals. It is incrementally measured. And this was done, for a number of reasons, for seafaring and for war, for radar. You've also got aeroplanes, all sorts of navigation systems all sorts of systems that rely on navigation and to be able to function in the world. So when we're dealing with another man-made construct similar to time in the way that it's been measured and numbered, and we have a similar thing being applied to our electromagnetic field, and it is not aligned with our magnetic field, we're looking at something that is causing an imbalance. And we could say, well, look, the Earth's got its magnetic poles, it's in its field and everything, and ley lines and all this sort of stuff, and it's going to just keep happily and merrily doing its own thing. What does it matter if we have this measuring system? This is what we access around, right now. This is how we need things to be for everything to run, and this is how we need to measure things in case of war and for the defense of, everything that we've come to build and experience here, and aren't we great? Sure. Let's just not think about it and keep moving forward. Let's not ask the question, what is the overall effect of having GPS through mobile internet and satellite systems and radar on the planet itself or on the human being? If our natural magnetics are saying one thing, but a man-made system is feeding us something else 24 hours a day, what is the overall effect? And we can apply the same question to time. What is the overall effect when we are running our daily lives by a set of numbers that tick over that are literally man-made in their construct and their understanding? Even the increments, and it's not even correct. I mean, we have a day out every 4 years. We call it a leap year. We've got to try and make up the time, and then we're still out in terms of greater galactic cycles. So it's not even accurate. And yet we are subjected and impacted by these systems, time and GPS, as they have been determined for us by others. And specifically where we have our own, as a human being, our own electromagnetic field that we emanate, which is proven. We are an energy system, and we work best a certain way. And it makes sense that where nature works best a certain way, that if man comes along and tries to overwrite the rules, that GPS in that context is a violation. And the effect that it has on us, that it has on the brain, that it has on the heart, that it has on our sense of feeling centered or not. That expression, I don't really feel centered. I feel a little off center. I feel like I'm not really sitting in myself. I feel like I'm a little bit tilted, Well, have a look at it. Magnetic and north and south magnetic poles are the opposite way around, and roughly 11.5 degrees away from geomagnetic, the geographic poles at any time. And it's the GPS system that is chugging through the air 24/7 through smartphones, through mobile internet, and through radio systems that require that type of measurement to be able to practice defense from a military standpoint. And when we have a brain that's full of magnetite crystals, and these magnetite crystals are responsive to our natural magnetics, but then we put a phone screen up to our face which is pumping GPS, there's an overlay and an overwrite that's happening and a tension that's being caused that affects us in such a way as that we become tilted. We get abducted really into an entirely different magnetic system. I mean, a geographic pole isn't even magnetic, so and we're part of a living energy system where electromagnetics speak volumes. And then we have the further issue of how and why we are coming to have some weather disturbances on this planet. And I think they are getting a bit obvious. And this is not going to be a debate about global warming and the incredible amount of radiation that we are generating every day with these systems. But what are we looking at when the environment of this planet seems to be exhibiting a little bit of unease in terms of the weather? Now, right there, we can offshoot that and say, oh, the weather's a simulation as well. Sure, okay. Well, if that's the case, why is it simulating really bizarre weather? Why would it do that? If we're looking at this from the perspective of this being a simulation run by a certain code, why would it be experiencing these types of glitches if it's so smart? We've got snowfall happening in summer for some people. It's a bit obvious. And so it's one of the areas that we can look to, apart from all the radiation we're spitting out, is this tension that's being caused between the magnetic field of this planet, the magnetic poles, and the man-made system, the geographic, which is allegedly what our planet orbits around, that axis. Now, another interesting thing is if you look at ancient landmarks that are said to have come to exist as a result of the work of the civilizations that lived in those areas at that time. And the main landmark that I have focused on in these files is the Giza Plateau in Egypt and the pyramids, the Great Pyramid of Giza being one of them. And I think for anybody who's into internet culture, we will have seen that there's a correlation there between the geographic location of the Giza Pyramid and the speed of light. There's also the correlation with pi, 3.142, or 3.1459, however you deal with it, and that this geographic location is arrived at through a man-made measurement system. So we're saying that a system that man invented after the fact happens to show that the location of this pyramid is in a certain place which is designated by particular numbers. 29.297231.1432 or something like that. How does the geographic system so accurately and mysteriously locate this landmark in terms of being where it is and allude to so many things and infer so many things through that geographic location? If it didn't exist before it was built, then we can say, well, they put it there because of the Orion star system and yada, yada, yada. Oh, I don't want to get buried in there and go to the afterlife, yada, yada, yada. Well, there's been a lot of speculation about what that complex is for and why it was created. I've put forward that I think it's a mining system. But as for why it is lined up with Orion's belt and all the rest of it is just sort of something that we can observe as being a fact. It's not until we start asking questions about what that connection could mean that we get into a longer conversation. But it's geographically located at these numbers: speed of light and pi. I mean, they're man-made systems in terms of how we measure them. I'm going to give you an example. If you can say there's 360 degrees in a circle, well, what happens if you split each degree in half and call that a degree? Well, then wouldn't there be 720? And right there we have a difference in the numerical representation within a simple system. So it's food for thought. Give it some thought. Geographic poles. Presumably, these are marked because our planet spins on that axis. But they're way out from the magnetic poles of this planet. And the opposite. We've also been told which part of the Earth is up and which part of the Earth is down, when the magnetic poles say the opposite. And how this weirdness, this contradiction, this interference is affecting us at a cellular level and at a magnetic level, and directly impacting the way we function and the way we think and the way we feel in our immediate environment every day. And that when you pick up a smartphone, which is the whole world in your hands, the whole entire world in your pocket, turned on all the time, and people wonder why they're getting anxiety all the time. And it has these systems in it, and it has time code and GPS. It is literally in your face, a military tool. It's a military device. And it is telling you that you must obey these artificial systems that we have measured with our limited perspective. We've tried our hardest. Here it is. Hopefully this helps. It certainly helps us. Now we know where you are. And if we can geolocate you frequently enough, then we'll be able to see where you are according to Google Maps. And from there we can see what businesses are around you. And from there we'll be able to shoot you some better ads. It's a bit bloody grim, isn't it? When people are encouraged to carry a smartphone and download apps just so a bunch of college kids can make money selling ads to keep their investors happy. It's a bit idiotic, really. I mean, if we could all be honest on that. Big tech. I mean, really. Really. So this is what we're carrying around with us every day. When we have a smartphone turned on, thinking that we're now as important as high-ranking CEOs of corporations, when we're not. And 9 out of 10 people don't actually need a smartphone anyway. And yet we are unknowingly, in most cases, unwittingly, subjecting ourselves to man-made systems that are pumping out of that thing at the speed of light, and impacting us, our perception, how we feel, our moods, our attitudes. The more proud among us will suggest that they are in no way affected by any of that. And it's I'm really sorry, I'm not saying this to offend those of you who think this way, but that's just a measure of your ignorance on the subject. You're impacted at an in a way that you can't even perceive. And the way that you are impacted actually causes you to come up with that assertion. I'm not impacted. I'm immune. That's not true. When we have all of us being impacted, 7 billion of us, allegedly, in a collective system where we are allegedly, on a planet, and we call this our collective consciousness, and we are all subjected to this system, a GPS system. We're impacted on a global scale. I've asserted in these files that the asteroid that hit actually knocked us off our natural axis, that our natural axis was our magnetic pole axis, and that we are now locked into a GPS grid, which is quite clearly marked. If you open up Google Maps or Google Earth, there it is. That's what they call our planet. And that's spinning around in the air and in binary data all the time, creating a hologram in the air that our brains then interpret and see as a planet. Chicken or the egg. And when we shoot back to what we've discussed in the previous podcasts and how time works and that it's not linear and that we can, for the sake of the argument, imagine it running on a vertical axis. And we look at the fact that Google Earth exists, well, isn't that a simulation? And how that affects the past, how that affects what we've been experiencing for millennia. It's all happening right now. Google Maps, Google Earth, and GPS systems, it's been in operation the whole time. Is this the underlying reason why there's so much hostility here? Is this the underlying reason that we're in a hostile universe? Is this the underlying reason why I'm starting to feel a little freaking hostile right now? Or is that my natural magnetics kicking in, saying, you know what, I'm not buying it? What is the simulation? I think I mentioned in the previous podcast or two that at this point it becomes a bit of a silly question. It's obvious we're in one. We carry the technology around with us all day, every day. It's turned on all day, every day. And we have military systems in place and satellite and radar and radio and TV and mobile internet, all these man-made systems streaming 24/7, and they are proud of it. They're actually proud of it. They think they've done a great job for the economy, for their own pockets, for their own sense of power, for their idea of progress. Causing weather anomalies with this stuff. Causing mental and emotional disturbances in human beings with this stuff. Causing physical illness in human beings with this stuff. Causing war. The irrational act of war with this stuff. Food for thought the next time you pick up your phone. Your smartphone. Food for thought the next time you wonder why you're getting anxiety and little panic tremors and freaking out while your brain is trying to tell you, I'm not happy, man. Food for thought while you have insomnia or can't sleep at night. And there's a single device in the room that, through its internal mechanisms, has convinced you into thinking it's bae. Your umbilical cord, your lifeline, your constant companion, And all that really has to happen is for that to be turned off and for you to unplug from the systems within it, and you are free of those artificial systems that are causing you much discomfort and dismay. And then further to that, food for thought, that the market is growing and they are forcing us through business to carry a smartphone. That nearly every business that I come into contact with doesn't even seem to realise that smartphones aren't the only phones on the market. It's still possible to get a phone that doesn't have the internet in it. Sadly, the government cut our landlines. We can't even communicate by protected signal anymore. All of mobile internet is unprotected. It doesn't matter what you encryption, schmiption. If it's in the air, it's unprotected. You have to understand how an electromagnetic field works and how binary data moves in through these frequencies and is transmitted, and how it's all talking to each other all the time. It's like a public bathroom out there. And the energy that's generated from constant hostility in the air 24/7, well, I mean, is this not typical of the Department of Defence? Is this not typical of boot camp? And on that note, I just want to throw in a real spanner in the works and mention that militarising the general public in peacetime is a war crime. That by no measure, instance or means were we ever supposed to legally become armed with military tools. And we can be pedantic about that particular phrase, but I'm using it as an interesting point. Why are we carrying around a military weapon? Why are we carrying around a walkie-talkie? Why are we feeling easily angered? Why don't we feel right? What is the simulation? Well, look in your immediate environment, find all the points where you can turn it off. So, magnetic poles, geographic poles, 11.5 degrees out, roughly. And I'll get back to the significance of what the 11.5 degrees means, even though I understand that's fluctuating. It was actually set that way for quite a while and came to be a general consensus understanding of the difference. How did our planet come to spin around geographic poles? Chicken or the egg? Which one came first? But do notice that they're not our magnetic poles, and they are the opposite way around. North and south are different. And we're not really feeling quite centered. So, food for thought. Our magnetic field operates in a different way to a geographic override. And incrementally, it's just been measured by numbers that are man-made constructs. And there could be twice as many increments. There could be half as many increments in a magnetic system. And further, can it even be measured in a magnetic system? So, I think in that respect, the United States Army and the United States Department of Defense need to step off. They need to back off the general public and not give us devices that inure us to their system, which they only need for defence. It's the only reason they need it, seafaring and navigation and stuff. And for defence. But what big tech have done is they've used the geographic positioning, the global positioning system, to sell ads. How is that an appropriate use of a military system? Using the geographic system, global positioning system, to sell ads. So Marky Zuckerberg can make lots of money. and keep his investors happy. Really? Oh dear. Look, I'm going to leave it there for today, but that's food for thought. If you have some questions or anything I've said has sort of sparked some questions of your own, once again, please let me know or keep it to yourself. At this point, it probably doesn't matter unless, and if you want to have a chat about it, and I'll be happy to address it in another podcast. But for now, there's some food for thought for you. Magnetic poles, geographic poles, and why are we carrying around devices with the global positioning system active in them 24/7 just so big tech can make money selling ads, when clearly the system itself was intended for military purposes, and arming the general public during peacetime is a war crime. I'll be back soon.